We're making our way through the book of Nehemiah, and last week we ended on a hiccup, technical difficulties beyond my control. And so we're going to revisit some of the things that we covered the old-fashioned way for several reasons. First of all, there's some fun facts I want to share about the East Gate. Second of all, we went way too quickly on the Mifkad Gate, the Gathering Gate. And I just heard that the junior high is about to go into an overview study of the book of Revelation. And this particular gate deals with situations associated with the book of Revelation. So keep that class in prayer. Young people are really, really hungry about eschatology. And so let's pray that things go well. All right. But then most importantly, last week we covered all of the gates and the people and the flow from salvation to Christ's return. And we never did get to talk about the punchline. So we've got to do that as well. And then we'll move into chapter 4, escalation. We talked about that last week, but we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. The gates cover a spiritual journey from salvation to Christ's return, and we ended up on the East Gate. So here's a fun fact. If you've seen any photographs of Jerusalem, you'll always see that East Gate, and behind it is the Dome of the Rock. And I have here East Gate ? So what happened in 1969, there was an archaeologist who was doing some work on that tomb that's circled there in that ellipse, and he fell through. And what he discovered was the East Gate of Nehemiah's time is actually buried beneath the current walls. And that moves us to the Mifkad Gate, the censoring or the mustering or the inspection gate. One of the things associated with those people were the goldsmiths were involved in that particular exercise. And the goldsmiths in end times is good news, bad news. The good news for some goldsmiths is that in one of those gatherings is the judgment seat of Christ, and we have available for us 5 different kinds of crowns, gold crowns, based upon our work and our motivation in that work. But then also you have some goldsmiths that would fall into this particular verse that comes from James. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you, because one of those gatherings is the great white throne judgment. Your riches have rotted and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You've laid up treasure in the last days. The Bible tells us that during the period of Revelation that it'll take a wheelbarrow full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Goldsmiths in that time, what good is your gold? I'm going to share this chart with Judy, by the way. So we're talking about some gatherings. The first gathering is the rapture of the church. We which are alive will be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And when that gathering occurs, there'll be another gathering called the judgment seat of Christ. Not a question of saved or lost, but rewards versus no rewards. And that ushers us into a gathering called the marriage supper feast of the Lamb. The Bible tells us that when we are raptured, we will be with him forever, which means if you study that timeline, if Christ is in the heavenlies, we're in the heavenlies. If Christ is on the earth as we know it, then we're on the earth as we know it. It's another kind of gathering. Revelation chapter 19, Jesus Christ comes back and he will have what is called the judgment of the nations. The good fish, bad fish, the sheep, the goats, the reaping, the wheats and the tares. And then ultimately the great white throne judgment. After the 1,000 years, the Bible says Satan will be released for a season and will deceive as many as the sands of the seas, and they'll march upon the city of Jerusalem, and a great fire will come down from heaven and consume them. Earth and heaven will speed away, and there will be set up this great white throne judgment. Everybody lost from the beginning of time until the end will appear before Christ. Their names will not have been found in the Lamb's book of life, but their works will be found in the book of works, and they will be judged. at the Mifkad gate, the gathering, the census, the inspection. So who is gathered? Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him. That's Revelation chapter 19. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and deceive the nations. And I saw a great white throne, all the lost from the very beginning. And inside, once you pass through that east gate, is that temple. And I saw no temple in the city. From the tabernacle that was dictated to Moses in Exodus chapters 24 through 26, everything was a blueprint of what is going to be in the heavenlies, and this is no exception. So here comes the punchline of chapter 3. What kind of a builder are you? Are you overinflated? Didn't do the work? Just kind of lazy about it? Are you an overcomer? You had an excuse, but you came and you worked hard anyway? Are you an overachiever? You worked the hardest. The size of your ego limits the size of your service. Don't be an overcomer. Don't be overcome, but be an overcomer. And Romans chapter 12 tells us this: do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that really becomes the theme of chapter 4. Because when we get into chapter 4, we're going to discover that as the progress continued, the opposition escalated. Only your best is good enough. In West Fallowfield Christian School, they hand out what they call the Golden Brush Award. It's used in the arts, and you don't have to be a Michelangelo to win that brush. The point is, was my project good enough, or was it the best I can do? Even though this other project might be much fancier than yours, this was the best I can do. And that's what God's looking for from us, our best. That takes us to chapter 4, building and battling. There's Charles Spurgeon. He said, building and battling are both parts of the Christian experience. You've heard it said many, many times, if you don't want the devil if you want the devil to quit bothering you, just stop living for Jesus, and he'll have you the devil has you right exactly where he wants you. And so based on the notion of Nehemiah chapter 4, he actually started a newsletter called The Sword and the Trowel. And we're going to study this thing, and we're going to find as opposition grew, their efficiency fell apart. What do you mean? Well, if you're plastering something, you have your trowel in one hand and you've got your materials in the other hand. Well, these people were forced to have their trowel in one hand and their sword in another hand. And other guys, when they're bearing the burdens, well, if you're carrying a rock, you can't really do so well with a sword. You got to have it on your hip. But if you're carrying maybe a bucket, you've got your sword too. And then other guys didn't participate at all. They had to stand and watch, all because of resistance. So, building and battling. And there you see an escalation. You go from mockery to intimidation to conspiracy, threats of violence, in some cases actual violence. And last week I said, even kids in bullying are not immune to this. It's something that happens. It's universal, unfortunately. But it happens with adults also. What was Nehemiah's response? He did not put on the boxing gloves. He did not do tit for tat. He did not start, well, you say this, your mother wears combat boots. Of course, that's a fashion statement this way. Oh, your mother has a mustache. Those are the things we argued about when we were kids. Nehemiah did not put on the boxing gloves. Instead, his response was prayer. The prayer wasn't just, well, God, just take care of everything and we're just going to continue business as usual. No. Christianity is not a spectator sport. Prayer, vigilance, Strategic organization. I talked about how they're going to change the way they're going to be doing their building. And of course, perseverance. The side on the left isn't going to quit. It's just going to keep on coming and keep on coming. And so this is really an outline of chapter 4. The opposition increases with progress. You know, our buddies Sanballat and Tobiah, they see the walls coming up and they're going to get pretty upset because success provokes resistance. And then, of course, then they start picking on those guys, ridicule. What's Nehemiah's response? Prayer and action. He unifies the people. You see where there were Nehemiah stabilizes the morale, but who's going to stabilize Nehemiah? The Lord. Security ultimately comes from God. And then one of the famous verses from Zechariah, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. So let's get into chapter 4. Now, when Sanballat had heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. As a reminder, Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, and he had the army of Samaria at his fingertips. And he was not excited right off the bat when Nehemiah shows up. The Bible says that he was wroth when he saw that somebody was looking forward to the welfare of the people. So somebody shows up, Nehemiah, with an intention, and now the intention is starting to show some results. So he's not a happy camper. And he said in the presence of his brothers and his army, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore the wall for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Are they going to have a dedication at the end? Are they going to be sacrificing to have their God help them out? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and the burned ones at that?" Now, the point of the burned ones is this. When Nebuchadnezzar came and had his siege warfare, he not only had his catapults coming from the western wall to help those flying rocks be more effective, they would haul lumber up against the walls and start torching the lumber. Now, those walls were made out of limestone. And as that heat would come, it would weaken the stone, it would crack them up. And that's why the broad wall, they had stones the size of the fist. But what they're saying, what Sanballat is saying is, you're going to even use the trash to rebuild this stuff. Those stones are weak. Your walls will be weak. And then his buddy Tobiah kicks in and he says, "Yeah, right on. See what they're building? If a fox tiptoes on the wall, won't the wall just fall apart? They're mocking these people." Nehemiah's response, prayer. "Hear, O God, for we're being picked on, we're despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt. Do not sweep it under the rug. Let not their sin be blotted out from their sight." And keep in mind, everybody, we talked about the great white throne, we talked about the judgment seat. Everybody's going to give an account to every thought and word and deed. He responded not just with prayer, but with purpose. "So we built the wall, and the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work." Remember that book? What'd the little engine say? "I think I can, I think I can, I think I can." The people had a mind to work. Well, guess what's happening? The wall's halfway up. The gates have not yet been hung. So there are some breaches there. And what we're going to discover is the opposition is going to move from mockery to conspiracy. It's not just Sanballat. It's not just Tobiah. It'll be the Arabs to the south, led by Geshem. It'll be the Ashdodites, the Philistines over on the west, and they're going to conspire to actually attack. It's going to fail, but we're also going to see that there's going to be some inside the ranks problems, and we're going to introduce the Eeyore Christian. They're going to go from I think I can, to some people saying, "There's no way. We can't pull this off." So opposition from every direction. Now, Sanballat was Samaria, that was to the north, and Tobiah was an Ammonite, that was to the east. The Ashtites, the Philistines, they were to the west, and the Arabs, meaning the Araba, not Saudi Arabia, were to the south. And they were very angry. So what did they do about it? They plotted together and come and fight against Jerusalem. Keep in mind, the number one defense in that time was the wall, and their wall was halfway up. They decided they're going to come and fight against the Jews. Now, and doesn't say, and I prayed. Prayer is contagious. If you start praying in earnest, if you start praying where other people see, now I'm not talking about going down to Walmart and standing in the front yard. I can remember my Rachel when I was a little girl. And we would go out to no fancy places. Burger King was our budget. And she'd look over me and she'd, Daddy, those people aren't praying. For them, prayer was the natural thing. It was the thing you're supposed to do. Prayer is contagious. And we pray to our God, and we set up a guard. They didn't just drop to their knees and pray and just say, oh, well, they're just going to come and get us. They prayed, and they set up a guard. So now comes the Eeyore Christian. You've got all those nations around Judea plotting, and now the people in the inside. In Judah, it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. The walls are too hard. By ourselves, we're not going to be able to finish this thing. So what are you going to do? Just lay down and surrender? And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. They heard about the plot, and they said, well, we've got the enemies on our back, and we've got all of this trash to our front. We're done. And at that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions, said to us 10 times, it wasn't just one time, 10 times, you must return to us. Keep in mind, you had the suburbs. The vast majority of those people lived in the suburbs. It's suggesting that not everybody went and built in the walls. They're saying, come back to us. Well, that verse is a little bit confusing. So let's look at what some of the other translations had to say. From whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. That makes more sense. Wherever you turn, they will attack us. They will come up against us from every side where you may turn. So they're not saying come back, because guess what? They were surrounded. It didn't matter where they were. Come back to the suburbs. It didn't matter. The armies are coming. So no matter where you turn, we're all in deep trouble. Book of Proverbs says there are certain things that God hates. And the last one was this: he that sows discord among the brethren. I mentioned to you last week Ben Franklin's famous quote, we either hang together or hang separately. So, in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people by their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And some of them kept their trowels. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord. He's great and awesome, and he'll fight for our families. And when our enemies heard that their plot was found out and God frustrated their plan, we all got back to work. From that day on, half my soldiers worked on construction, the other half held their weapons. And the leaders stood behind them around the entire wall. We talked about some of the leaders stationed at some of those gates. And those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the wall with one hand and held his weapon on the other. Their efficiency was cut by more than half because some of the guys weren't even working, and yet they finished the wall in 52 days. We'll get to that. Each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built, and the men sounded the trumpet. He was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great. This is no small task. And it's widespread. We're working on the wall simultaneously in every one of the quarters. So if the guys do strike, we're going to sound the trumpet. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us, and God will fight for us. So there's a panoramic view of what's going on. There's the enemy ready to strike. There are the workers trying to do something. Some of them are on guard. Some of them are carrying things. But the people had a mind to work. So we labored at the work, and half of them had spears from the break of dawn till the stars came out. It wasn't an 8-hour shift. I also said to the people, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. We're going to discover in later chapters that there weren't any houses built within the city of Jerusalem. All the people decided they were going to build in the suburbs. If you go back to the book of Ezra and the book of Haggai, there was a hiatus where they stopped building, and Haggai says, hey, no, wait a minute. You built these fine houses for yourself. You misappropriated the lumber that was supposed to go into the temple, so get back to work. So they built those houses in the suburbs, and all these guys were walking towards Jerusalem to build. They're going over there before daybreak, and they're saying, come back. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes, which was kept at the weapon at his right-hand side. That is, they full time. When I was with Oracle, I was doing a project with Israel, and I met the Israeli Oracle rep who was in the National Guard. There was no war at the time. He said, there's a difference. He was a pilot in the National Guard. He says, there's a difference between the U.S. National Guard and the Israeli National Guard. He said, in the U.S., once a week, you go and you sit in a hangar and drink coffee. He said, in Israel, once a week, we spend the weekend sitting in the cockpit. The full weekend. So you figure out what that does to your biology. That takes us to chapter 5. We're going to make an interesting shift, talking about the people and the pressure that they had, not just from the foreigners, not just from their own people, but from their own economic situation. So Nehemiah stops oppression of the poor. There arose a great outcry of the people and of the wives against their Jewish brothers. Now, the women many times have a bad rap. They say, well, they've got, Sister Long Tongue. Well, I've met some men that have good competition to the women. But I will say this, guys, we're up for a challenge. We're going to build that wall. We're going to fight against the enemy. Women, they think more in terms of security. How are we going to feed the kids? Who's going to weed the garden? You're over there fooling with that wall. So they think way differently than guys, right? So there rose an outcry. What'd they have to say? 4 different complaints. They said, we're starving, we're broke, we're behind on our taxes, and our kids got sold into slavery. So Nehemiah was not a happy camper. He wasn't happy with Sanballat, Tobiah, or Geshem. Now he's not very happy with his own people that are oppressing his own people. I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words, these 4 complaints. I took counsel with myself. Now you look at that and you say, well, John talked about all that prayer that Nehemiah was. We don't see where he's taking counsel with God. He's taking counsel with himself. Well, Paul wrote, he said, pray without ceasing. But there are some significant portions of Scripture where God told people to stop praying. Number one was Paul. He prayed 3 times that the thorn in his flesh be removed. And the response was, my grace is sufficient for you. In other words, don't even bother. I'm not going to respond to that request. Moses in Exodus was backed up against the Red Sea, and there's Pharaoh on the other side. And Moses starts crying out to God, and God says, why do you cry to me? Tell the people to cross the sea. It was evident what he was supposed to do. You don't need to pray about it, just go do it. And then with Joshua was praying. There was that incident at Ai where Achan had stole the gold and silver and the Babylonian garment. And God says, Joshua, why are you praying about this thing? You've got to fix it. You've got to fix this. You got to fix this now. If I'm walking down the street and somebody attacks my wife, I don't have to pray about it. I know what I have to do. I throw myself at it. Doesn't matter what happens to me. I've got to throw myself at it. So I took counsel with myself. We're going to see that what he did was he said, okay, God, I know what I have to do, but how am I going to do it? He put some thought into what he's going to do before he took his action. I took counsel with myself and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. And I said, you're exacting interest, each from his brother. And he didn't just go over to the sidelines and say, oh, guys, by the way, you need to cut that out. He pulled the people together and he charged them in front of the people. He pulled all the people together, a great assembly, and he said, you're charging those guys interest and you shouldn't be doing it. And I said, we, as far as we're able, keep in mind, I mentioned to you, Nehemiah was a rich man, and we're going to see that in a little bit. He says, as far as we're able, we've been buying back people from the nations. We've been trying to redeem our own folks, and you're charging interest. The thing that you're doing is not right. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God? That sounds King James-ish. You know, James wrote, my brethren, these things ought not so to be. That's word for word out of King. That's what this sounds like. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain, inferring without interest. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. So 3 times in Deuteronomy, in Exodus, and Leviticus, they're being told, don't charge interest to your brothers. Not only if there's a loan outstanding, don't charge them interest, but give back their property, give back their fields, their vineyards, their olive garden, their houses, and give them as much back as what you've already taken from them. And the people said, of course, they better say this because they're in the front of this huge assembly, right? We will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do as you say. And I called the priests and made them swear to do as they had promised. So even the priests were violating the Mosaic law, and they were ripping off their kin. Not pretty. I also shook out the fold of my garment. I have a graphic that explains that a little bit better. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. So there's a graphic, okay? And the way their robes were made, they would gather up the robe, and that would create a pocket. You know, we've got this kind ready made, but they had to do their thing. And he said, I'm going to take my pocket, I'm going to loosen that robe, and I'm going to shake this thing out. Now, if I'm not mistaken, every one of you has a junk drawer, okay? And whenever you need something, it's in that junk drawer. My problem, I've got several junk drawers. And what he's saying is all those treasures, all those things that you have, they're all going to be shaken out. And he's saying if you don't do what you promised you're going to do, God's going to shake you out. Your land, your labor, your house, it's going to, what goes around comes around is what he's saying. And all the assembly said, amen, and praise the Lord. And the people did as they promised. So they're starting to solve the problems. The people said, we're broke, we're hungry, we're enslaved, they're trying to buy them back. were behind on taxes. Now, Nehemiah was the governor, so he's going to want dealing with the tax situation. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor, those 12 years that he was there, from the 20th year to the 32nd year, neither I nor my brothers ate food allowance of the governor. They were allowed so much food. He said, no, we don't need that. I don't need it. My brothers don't need it. And a whole lot of other people that he invited to dinner don't need it either. And the former governors, they were ripping off the people. They were taking the allowance and then some. And it was a scheme that it went down, just almost a reminder of the publicans during Jesus' time. They took a position, they would collect the taxes for the Romans, and they'd skim a little bit of extra for themselves. So he's not only taking care of these economic problems of the people, he's also taking care of business. He's taking care of the wall. I also persevered in the work of the wall. And while that's going on, keep in mind he was a rich man. He didn't buy any land. His people didn't buy any land. They were there to work on the wall. Moreover, 150 people, Jews, officials, foreigners, they came, and at my expense, I fed these guys. Ox, sheep, birds, wine. And he didn't use any of the food allowance that he was allowed to take. And then he says, remember me, O God, that I have done all this stuff for the people. That takes us to chapter 6. Chapter 6, we're going to have the wall is going to be finished up towards the end, but we've gone from mockery to intimidation to escalation and now conspiracies. So there's an overview of chapter 6. The walls will have been completed. The gates are not yet hung. And there are buddies in the bottom left, let's say Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And they're going to say, hey, Nehemiah, we want to talk to you. Come with us over to some village in the plain of Ono. We're going to discover that Ono was 37 miles from Jerusalem. Why would Nehemiah, who's persevering on the walls, who's trying to be a good example to his people, why would he go to some retreat 37 miles away? Because he sniffed out that there was a problem. Well, that didn't work out so well. So then they go and they hire a bunch of prophets inside Jerusalem, and they say, you won't go 37 miles away? Come meet with us inside the temple. Well, that's a no-no unless you're a priest. So that's what chapter 6 is all about. Now, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall, that there was no breach left in it, but the gates weren't hung yet, they invited me. They said, come with me to a village in the plain of Ono. But they intended to harm me. And so he was invited to Ono, and he said, oh no, to Ono. And I sent messengers to them saying, I'm doing a great work. I can't go down to Ono. Why should the work stop? And they tried this 4 times. You know, Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result. Well, they figured that out, but on the 5th time, they decided they're going to write an open letter. They took to social media. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servant with an open letter in his hand. Reminds me of when Sennacherib was coming and doing siege of Hezekiah in Jerusalem, and they started talking in the Hebrew language and saying, you put your faith in God instead of us, you're going to be eating your dung and drinking your own urine, but if you surrender now, we're going to give you a place to live. It was psychological warfare. So in the 5th time, they send out an open letter. And the letter said this, it is reported among the nations, and even Geshem has to say it. Now, there are certain troublemakers that when you hear one of these troublemakers, your ears should perk up, right? I heard. He said, she said. Did you hear? The book of Proverbs says, the words of a gossip, I don't like whisperer, Because what I love to do with some of my grandchildren say, come here, I want to tell you a secret. And they come close and I say, I love you. Well, that too goes down into the innermost parts, but it's a good thing. Going down to the innermost parts works for two people, the speaker and the listener. And so you got to cut it off. So the open letter said, it is reported among the nations that you and the Jews intend to rebel. Keep in mind, Samaria was a governor, and he had one of those original letters that Nehemiah had the king write, Artaxerxes, to write for him. He said, you're going to rebel, and that's why you're building the wall. You're going to become the king, and you're going to get some prophets that's saying he is the king, and the king is going to hear all this stuff. And so let's talk about this thing. Well, if that was a real conspiracy, he should have been saying, come talk to us. He should have gone to Persia and say, there's problems over there. Then I sent him saying, you guys are out of your mind. There's no such thing like that happening here. They wanted to scare us. They said, the Jews are going to drop their hand from the work and it's not going to be done, but God strengthened my hands. So now they couldn't go 37 miles to Ono, so they're going to say, okay, you're already inside the city. Why don't you come and have a conversation with us in the temple? So now I went into the house of Shemaiah. Now Shemaiah, with his lineage there, was high up in the pecking order, okay? And they said he was confined to his house. So let's get together in the temple, within the temple, and let's close the doors, for they're coming to kill you. Well, why was Shemaiah confined inside of his house? He was either sick or impure, like leprosy had to be segregated from the people, or he was trying to do something like Ezekiel did. He was locked up for 390 days. Or he was pretending. He says, look, I'm cowering in my own house. They're going to kill you. They're going to come, and they're coming after you next. But for whatever reason, he was locked up in his house. And we're going to find out it wasn't just Shemaiah. There was a whole network of prophets that were on the take. So he's going to bait him with the house of God. How many fishermen do we have in here? You're missing a fun time. The bait is something that is attractive to the fish. It's something that's good for them. That goes all the way back to the Eve and the Garden of Eden. So here's the bait, the house of God. It's a churchy place to meet. Let's meet in the house of God. Let's get some sanctuary. He's playing on Nehemiah's natural fear. The book of Proverbs says this, talking about bait. All at once he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast till all arrows pierces its liver. As a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life. Now, us older folks, we're more involved with the sin of the mind than the sin of the body. Okay? But younger folks, not for these guys in the back, at some point your brain is going to quit working. And you're going to be led like an ox to the slaughter. Now, I've heard a pastor say this, and I've repeated it several times, and he was talking to the young ladies in the audience. He said, now, if some guy is where he shouldn't be, you just have the sweetest voice you can come up with and tell him to just close his eyes, and I'll give you an experience you'll never forget. And when he closes his eyes, just give him one of these, just right smack in the nose. And by the time he recovers, you're not going to be in his arms anymore. So here's the trap. Notice, it doesn't matter that there was a hunk of meat on that trap, and that's what caused the bear to come there in the first place. Here comes the trap. Spiritual and political ruin. First of all, it'd be a violation to the law. He was not a Levite, he was not a priest, and he had no business being inside the temple. We're going to find out in chapter 11 that Tobiah had an apartment inside the temple. He wasn't even a Jew, let alone a priest or a Levite. He also would have a loss of integrity. What would the people say if the guy who's supposed to be on post with the trumpeter watching for the enemy, what are they going to say if he's locked himself inside the temple? I said, would such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? It was a death penalty to do that. And I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he had pronounced the prophecy against me because he was hired. And for this purpose, he was hired, that I would be afraid and I'd get a bad name. And now he prays again. He says, remember Tobiah and Sanballat according to these things that they did, and also remember the prophetess Noadiah. What an interesting name, meeting with the Lord. He was told to go meet in the temple. And the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. It wasn't just Shemaiah. There was a whole crew that were trying to mess things up. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. I find that amazing. No excavators, no man lifts, no bulldozers, not even Ryobi. They finished the wall in 52 days. And when our enemies heard it, all the nations around us, and we've seen that map on several occasions, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. For they perceived that this work had been done because we're so wonderful. They perceived that the work had been accomplished with the help of our God.